Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine live stream update, frontline update, really. So I'm going to talk about the map, but there are other bits and pieces that I'm going to bring in. I am lost. I am lost without Matt Bishop, good old Matt, who helps me on my live streams. He is obviously in bed, asleep in the middle of Australian night. I can't have a go at him for that. But in my head, I am, damn you, Matt, I need you. Anyway, this is what happens when I decide to do live streams at the last minute, because actually it's easier for me to do live streams. It takes less preparation on the back end. I don't have to edit. I just do the videos and then they're there and I go and have a cup of tea. So live streams are actually easier for me when I'm under time pressure. And that's why I often do them at the weekends, because it's crazy time. Anyway, whatever you want to know about what's going on the front lines and whatnot. And hello to everyone. I just as people have been mentioning over the past few weeks, I was just looking on Discord and someone's connected up with me on Discord to say, look, I've been banned, I can't make any comments on your channel at the moment. Lots of people are saying they're getting banned by YouTube on my channel, and I'm sure this is the same elsewhere. There's nothing to do with me. I don't control anything. Well, I can ban people, but I don't. Very few people I've banned in the past, and not for any of the reasons you guys are talking about. So apologies that YouTube are doing that. Some people are saying it's because they're supporting Israel in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Some people are saying they don't know. They've obviously said something that the YouTube algorithms don't like, or maybe people are reporting them. Just log your complaints with YouTube and see how far it gets you. Bear in mind, I've logged many a complaint with YouTube about having my whole channel taken down for a week, and it got me precisely nowhere. So anyway, what has been going on Frontline? Well, before we get there, let's look at a few bits of news. This is basically, the socials are afire with all sorts of claims. Afire is probably the correct term, because Kerch has been hit, or at least around Kerch has been hit. Russian sources are reporting that the Russian Kherson class ship Project 22800 was hit in a Ukrainian strike today at the shipbuilding yard in Kerch, Crimea. So this is near the Kerch Bridge. People are saying the Kerch Bridge is being targeted. I'm not sure that's definitely the case. Air defenses are active close to the shipyard, and several explosions were heard in the area, which is near Crimean Bridge. Now, the way I share this browser with you, when I have all the tabs and I don't have to change for each individual tab, I can just do this and it changes tabs. It means I can't, unfortunately, play the sound to you. Nonetheless, there is plenty. Just go onto Twitter and type in Kerch and you get all sorts of stuff coming up now. There are bits of footage like this, which is, you can hear explosions in the background. You see lots of bits of smoke. Things are happening. Things are falling to the ground. I say falling to the ground because there appears to be evidence that air defenses have at least worked on one occasion, hitting something in the air, whether it be a drone or a missile. I don't know. I'll show you the video in a second. But it is very active. Low rumbling sounds of explosions there. And people obviously, wondering what's going on. Now, this is a video I was just kind of talking about. I'll just make this a little bit bigger. It swings around all over the place, and you can see there's something in the air. There's maybe a little puff of smoke, and then something on fire falls to the ground. Whether that's a drone, whether that's a missile, don't know, but because it looks like there's something quite slow moving there before it is hit. So that's why I think it might not be a missile, rather than that being the cloud. It does look slow. Let's just play that through one more time, and I'll try and pause it. So there, I don't think that is moving quickly. I think that is more likely a drone, and it's not. That's not the smoke. But then it's still there broadly. So I don't know. Your guess is good as mine. What is happening? Well, it appears that the shipbuilding or ship repair or dry dock or whatever that is, shipbuilding plant at Kerch has been hit. And that could be where that vessel is, or at least that's the claim from Russian sources. As you can see there, something is on fire. That could be yet another naval vessel taken out of operation by Ukrainian strikes. So this is really significant. Ukrainians, you can say what you like about the successful failure of the counteroffensive, but the Ukrainians have had huge amounts of success in terms of other metrics. And one of the biggest ones is moving the Black Sea Fleet out of Crimea. As I keep saying, the Black Sea Fleet, I mean, there are several things, I'm going to repeat myself, but, the whole reason that Russia are involved in Syria is because it gives them, and supporting the Assad regime, is because it gives them a warm water port on the Mediterranean. So it doesn't freeze, and they have access for their navy to the Mediterranean directly. That's the only reason they are in Syria. And the main reason, a really large component of why they are doing this war at the moment, is Crimea, and what Crimea gets them. And it gets them a deep sea warm water port. They don't have a deep sea port along the Russian coast in the Black Sea. And by deep sea port, I mean one where they can park their boats, moor their ships, and a lot of ships in here. They end up having to moor them all. You can see actually on this satellite imagery that a lot of ships are moored out here. That's because it's not deep enough in here, and actually it's more of a commercial port and not a maritime port. There aren't the dry docks, there aren't the shipbuilding, there isn't the ability for submarines and all sorts to be properly catered for there. There was a project to upgrade that port back years ago, I think maybe even prior to 2014, and that was due to become the new Sevastopol. But when they annexed Crimea, they shelved that because they had Sevastopol. So Sevastopol is arguably one of the main reasons the Russians are doing this war thing. As you can see, it's a protected port, it's deep, and it has all sorts of different areas. It's a large port where it's just really ideal for the Russian Navy, right? And it then gives them effectively access to the Black Sea. So if you can connect that to Russia, which they did with the Kerch bridge, which the Ukrainians will call an illegal bridge, but they annexed this. They basically stole Crimea, built a bridge to the Russian mainland so they could service Sevastopol directly, and that gives them access to the Mediterranean Sea, which in turn gives them access to the Suez Canal and out to the Red Sea and out into this, this part of the world, but also the whole of the Mediterranean, which is a central. Well, it's not central part of Europe. It's, the land is a central part of Europe, but it's an incredibly important European Sea, North African European Sea. And then that gives them access out the Straits of Gibraltar to the Atlantic Ocean. Otherwise, they have to deal with what is almost always frozen ports. There are some ports that aren't frozen, but then as soon as you get out of them, that's frozen. So this kind of land up here doesn't really help them too much. And then you have to go across to Vladivostok in the northeastern areas of Russia, and that again will freeze, so on and so forth. So Sevastopol is massively important. So in this period of the counteroffensive, the Russians have been pushed out of Sevastopol and to Novorossiysk, which is not ideal. The whole point of the war is that they have this firm control over Crimea and that they get a land bridge to Crimea so that they can service their Black Sea fleet. Right? It's all about this global chess game and about global power. But that is being constrained by the use of Ukrainian long-range missiles and drones. And that is now happening again today. So that's a really important dimension of this counteroffensive period. Unfortunately, I can't really read too many of the live questions coming in at the moment, because otherwise I spend all this time reading and then a lot of time not looking at you guys and talking sense. Right. Okay. So moving on, I'm going to just talk a little bit about Zelenskyy. So today at the front is not a stalemate. Ukraine has been in more difficult times. This was stated by the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Quote, "There will be no such thing as talking to Russia and giving it something," Zelenskyy added. According to the president, Putin will not stop even after this, and the sacrifice of territories will lead to another frozen conflict. So this is broadly about the conflict in the moment. He's saying it's not a stalemate, and actually Ukraine have been in. They have. I mean, Ukraine is in a much better position now than it was a year and a half ago. That's absolute. They wouldn't be able to force the Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol if they weren't in a more commanding position than they were previously in terms of their capabilities, capacities, and so on and so forth. But he's also answering the news reports coming out that the US and the EU are maybe pressuring Ukraine into doing peace talks. And I think that there's a statement there concerning that. and this is also answering Zelenskyy. So there are claims that, and I want to look into this a little bit more, but there are claims that Zelenskyy didn't have permission to do that big Economist article that is involved in, and the essay that he provided for the Economist. So there is, I would love to know what's going on there, whether he was or was given permission, what his intentions were, because otherwise he's just feeding the Russians a load of information that's quite sensitive. Well, that's worth doing if that's given for a really good rationale, and whether there's psyops involved, etc., etc., etc. So I really want to get to the bottom of that. Nonetheless, it appears, at least from some corners, that Zelenskyy wasn't hugely in favor of that happening. We've also heard that the head of the special forces of Ukraine has been sacked, and he found out by social media. I was going to do this morning in my news bit, but I didn't. I just wanted to know a little bit more about it, but actually I haven't heard much more about it. So here it is. He found out by social media due to, I think, some of the communication channels breaking down or whatever, but that's not good news, I guess. It'd be interesting to see, again, what the reasoning for that was. Right. Along this idea of, where we're at and stalemates and so on and so forth, this is a British MOD intelligence update for today. Over the past 3 weeks, Russia has likely lost around 200 armored vehicles during its assaults on the Donbass town of Avdiivka. This is likely due to a combination of relative effectiveness of Ukraine's modern handheld anti-armor weapons, mines, uncrewed aerial vehicle dropped munitions, and precision-guided artillery systems. I'd agree with that, all of the above. Now, I think we've got definitively over 200 pieces have been counted, I think. And then there's that's your benchmark minimum. So they've lost a massive amount of kit there. And they're also losing a lot of kit in Vuhledar and indeed elsewhere too. In response, Russian forces have highly likely switched to conducting dismounted infantry-based assaults in this sector. Ukrainian forces face similar tactical challenges as the attacking force over the summer. The idea that the Russians are now resorting more to meet assaults in Avdiivka, infantry-based assaults. They either don't have the levels or the number of pieces of equipment that they need or want, or they don't want to sacrifice that equipment, so they're just willing to, I guess, sacrifice their men instead. Like previous Russian offensives, the Avdiivka assaults have often been characterized by advances across open ground leading to high losses. It is plausible that Russia has suffered several thousand personnel casualties around the town since the start of October 2023. Russia's leadership continues to demonstrate a willingness to accept heavy personnel losses for marginal territorial gains. So this is nothing that we don't know. It's all the sort of stuff I've been saying recently. It's interesting to see the UK intelligence saying very explicitly that they are losing huge amounts of equipment and personnel for very small territorial gains. And that seems to be the calculus that they are fine with. So there you go. Andrew Perpetua has a little bit of a shout today. He says, I've been saying this all year, ever since January, and even before then, Ukraine should not perform any major offensive actions until Russia is sufficiently attrited in terms of armored equipment and artillery. What is the purpose of so this is really important, because this is exactly what I've been saying with regard to the counteroffensive. So the counteroffensive started with this big old attack near Malotokmachka, amongst other things, but they lost a bunch of equipment in this area and then went, oh, hang on, that wasn't supposed to happen. We're supposed to be, as Zelenskyy said the other day, they had calculated they could move 30 kilometers in a day, and they'd be down at Tokmak pretty soon and down by the coast, in time for late summer snacks. That never happened because they got caught back here. We as we all know, mines, defenses, helicopters, ATGMs, etc., etc., etc. They lost a bunch of equipment, and the Ukrainians aren't so happy to lose a huge amount of equipment and men for small territorial gains. So actually they stepped back then. And although they have still been trying to make those gains, they've not been committing the equipment that they did right at the beginning. Now, what they then started doing was attriting Russian categories of equipment like tanks, APVs, and anti-aircraft warfare systems, air defense systems, electronic warfare systems, and logistics, and so on and so forth. So all those figures I report to you every day, they've been incredibly successful in degrading the Russians in those categories. this has then meant that actually, so this is exactly what Andrew Perpetua is talking about here, which is you don't go and attack until you've sufficiently degraded all those bits of kits. And he says, what is the purpose of defense? So instead, you need to defend to attrit. What's the purpose of defending? Is it to hold onto land? No. Is it to hold a position? No. The purpose of defense is to create the conditions necessary for a successful offensive. Like, you don't just defend ad infinitum. You don't go, oh, we need to defend now. What's our goal? Oh, just sticking here, getting attacked for the next 57 years. Like, no, that's not the goal. The goal of defense is to prepare yourself to be ready to attack. This is the argument he's putting across, and I go with that, which is yeah, we are maybe trying to stop this position from being taken, trying to hold on to this land, but it's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is doing stuff with the enemy that means that when we are ready, when we have given ourselves time to either reconstitute, to get our manufacturing up, to get gear from abroad, to get training done, whatever it is, we're buying ourselves time to then go on the offensive, because we want to win this war. You've got two sides that want to win a war, right? So defending, this defensive period, is preparation for the offensive, is preparation for us to win. And part of that is going to be the attrition of that equipment. You should not leave a defensive stance until and unless you can perform a successful offensive operation. This year, and I mean at literally any part of this year, Ukraine was never in any position for a successful offensive operation, and they never should have attempted one. So that, which is fine in hindsight. So the idea is, in Tokmachka, they thought they were in a position to do that, although they were still waiting for a lot of equipment. A lot of equipment hadn't turned up. The Abrams hadn't turned up. Zelenskyy was complaining that they were having to delay because they didn't have equipment. They didn't have all the trained people in place. But even when most of that was in place, and they did start their counter offensive, the problem is they kind of miscalculated the effect of minefields, fortifications, ATGMs, helicopters, etc., which means they actually weren't in a position to do their offensive, and they worked that out within that first week. And that's what I said. That's when I said they changed their objectives. So if that was your objective, and that's all you're worried about is taking territory to Tokmak and to Belyans, then yeah, it failed. But it failed within the first week, and they knew that. And then it's like, right, now we need to attrit, and wait until we're in a better position to then do this proper counteroffensive. And as that time went on, that was more and more the case. I hope that makes sense. So Andrew Perpetua, I think, spot on here. Ukraine's primary goal should be defense, not to hold a position, not to hold a city, but to create the conditions they require to win. And in other words, they must destroy Russia's armor, their tanks, their BMPs, their BTRs, their MTLB, etc., and their artillery. So yeah, for me, it's going to be artillery, electronic warfare, and air defenses. Tanks and MTLBs and APCs and whatnot come after that, and they're still really important, right? Only then can they even contemplate a successful offensive operation, which may not be for another year or two at this point. I feel like, I'd hope it's a damn sight sooner than that, to be fair. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills reading all of these BS articles coming out. The situation has not changed, but the reporting has. The reporting is getting increasingly stupid. Journalists, get better at your job and find another profession. So he has a right old shout about that. Let's see if you guys are in agreement. So AP is spot on. Ukraine has just lost a lot of equipment in a barely successful counteroffensive to Russia's Avdiivka offensive. Current losses of material are rather similar for both sides, which is bad. I don't think they are the same for both sides. So because of Avdiivka, but that's not actually, interestingly enough, that's not Ukraine's defense has done that, or it is. Sorry, it's not their offense has done that. It is their defense. Russia attacked, committed some kind of mass harikiri, and have attritted equipment in less than a month. So 2/3 of a month of October, they lost more equipment than Ukraine has lost in the Robotina axis in 5 months. So there's not a parity of lost equipment. The Russians have lost huge amounts of equipment, but then the reality is they have a lot more equipment to lose. Yes, right. So let's now go on and look at the map. Sorry, there's probably lots of stuff to say from the live comments. I cannot do two things at once. So actually, here's an appeal. If anyone is up for being contacted pretty last minute, that can do what Matt does when Matt's not available. So Matt's my go-to. He's a good man, really helpful and great at doing what he does in talking, looking at the comments and helping out there. If anyone else feels comfortable in front of the camera and also knows their onions, knows what they're talking about to a sufficient degree to help support me in doing a live at some point, just try and reach out to me and let me know, and I'll shoot you an email on whatever. We can talk through that. Anyway, as you can see, not a lot of change to the front line. We'll go to the northeast sector. The ISW, Institute for the Study of War, doesn't really say an awful lot about this area, other than a Russian mail blogger posted footage purportedly of Russian airborne VDV, so the paratroopers, snipers, operating in the forest areas near Crimea. Other than that, yes, there are claims that the Russians are making gains. They're claiming in this northern area. No changes to the mapping, though. So I will whiz through this fairly quickly. Andrew Perpetua is talking about, there was talk there about snipers operating in the forest area. Andrew Perpetua is mentioning that there are snipers around the Vuhledar area too, or whether it's the same unit, I don't know. It's kind of nearby the forest. Yeah, snipers are really, really important. As I've said to you before, snipers, no matter what stage of offensive, defensive, this or that, snipers take the second greatest casualty numbers out of all the different ways of sort of dying. First one is artillery. And artillery in normal times, I think the stats were 88% artillery, 10% snipers, and 2% other things. So the 2% other things are going to be small arms fire. It's going to be, I guess, mines and whatnot. But essentially, it's artillery is your big one, and the second one is snipers. So snipers are super, super important. Right, coming down to Bakhmut now. Actually, that's in the wrong place. So not too much to mention about. Oh no, that's Avdiivka. I don't think I have anything on Bakhmut, to be perfectly honest. The ISW, as you can see, says very little. This is comparatively very little for Bakhmut. So maybe a bit of a slowing down. But the reality will be that the weather is going to be taking an effect there. And actually, there's something I have to say as a bit of a correction to what I said this morning, which was there were only a dozen FAB 500 bombing attacks on Ukrainian settlements on the right bank of the Dnipro, which is on the west. And I said that can only be two things. Either they don't have enough FAB 500s or they're stockpiling them, or both. And of course, there was a third option. As a false dichotomy, I do apologize. As someone pointed out, the weather could well be bad, and I think it is bad. And actually, the very low hanging clouds, I think, are around there, and that will completely affect aviation and whether you are able to get your planes up and drop those bombs in the required manner. So I do take that back. It might not be they're running out of FAB 500s or stockpiling them. It's far more likely to be the weather affecting that. So thank you for someone correcting me on that. Right. Anyway, back to the front line. So that is Bakhmut. Not a lot to be said. There is no change there at the moment. So we go to Avdiivka, and I think I've got this one is in the wrong place. So Avdiivka. Let's find out on my map first of all. So we were at Bakhmut, no change there. To the south of Bakhmut, here around Klishchiivka and Andriivka, we have seen the Ukrainians gaining momentum there, but the Russians are pushing back too. They don't want to roll over and let the Ukrainians take Bakhmut so easily. So not that it is easy at all, but they are pushing back in the Bakhmut area. We have Avdiivka, where the only change to the mapping is Russian gains towards Pervomaisky along from Pisky, and that's deep state map. Thank you so much to JR, who's done the mapping for me today. People ask, who is JR? So Jeroen is a member of the channel who just helps me do the mapping because I literally don't have time. And in fact, he's bloody vital. So thanks, mate. And Grimsoft on the Discord server is a legend as well. So thank you, guys. Anyway, there are some gains to the south there. No changes to the north and to the direct south of Avdiivka, so places like Opitny and Vodyane, and up here in Krasnohorivka. It is slightly worrying up there in Krasnohorivka. Global War Monitor is sort of catching up here. Russia has advanced further towards the Avdiivka towards Avdiivka and the railway, attempting to try to cross. They are indeed at that railway, as far as I can gather, and the question is whether they have the tree lines on the sort of southwestern side of the railway under their control or not. Syriac Maps claims that they have gained control up towards Stepova. Stepova was under a lot of pressure yesterday. Not a lot of information coming out about that. The infamous meat grinder assaults have become a staple of Russian operations in Ukraine. It is thanks to expending the lives of thousands of convicts that the Wagner Group was, after 8 months of fighting, finally able to seize East Ukraine's Bakhmut. Well, Bakhmut, as I have said many times, I think in hindsight, and at the time I was sort of arguing about this, but I think it was a success. And the death of Wagner can be laid at the feet of Bakhmut and the decision to try and hold it. So you can argue that Bakhmut was a failure. Some people still do, but I think it attrited the Russians and fixed them to such a significant degree that they were unable to do as much elsewhere. And not only that, they lost so many troops, including Wagner troops, that led, really, it was the kind of domino effect that led to Prigozhin dying, being really unhappy with the state of affairs, and Wagner not becoming an entity. So there you go. So Ukrainian commander Filimonov reports Russia's unyielding meat grinder frontal assaults now include toxic gas from drones, better recon, kamikaze drones. Russia also deploys untrained prisoners in Kupiansk, echoing tactics from Bakhmut's 2022 to 2023 battle. So there's some claims about that, but yes, certainly looks like meat grinder assaults. So Euromaidan Press, Russia switched to meat grinder assaults at Avdiivka after losing 200 armored vehicles. The switch is a trusted tactic that likely prompted by Ukraine's effective use of anti-armor weapons, mines, drones, and artillery. What else is there to say? No report says in Avdiivka the situation remains unchanged, bringing the 47th mechanized. So that's a fairly decent, or is a decent Ukrainian unit that's been brought into the area to help. That's probably why we're seeing some Bradleys in the area. So some have been lost near the Terracon, and a Leopard 2 was lost there. But they are a decent group. Terracon, he says, remains contested. So this is the slag heap there that some people are saying is under Russian control. Others are saying, yeah, but it's not. It doesn't confer that much advantage to them, and it is a bit dangerous, really, to be on top of that slag heap because you end up being quite the target. Drones active around here means that the slag heap is a big target, really, for artillery, for drones, FPV drones and IED dropping drones, artillery and mortars. So it likely is contested to some degree, but there are different claims as to past the slag heap whether the Russians have control over any of the land there. And both Deep State and the pro-Russian mapper Syriac Maps have Russian control up to the railway line to the southwest of Terracon, and that would be a worry if that is the case. Andrew Perpetuus slightly more conservative there. Just making sure that everyone is okay in the comments. Thank you very much for kind words for some of you. I can see. Thank you for being on board here. Right, so that is. Oh, and I have to say a big thank you to Michael Barnett. We appreciate your efforts, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Michael. It allows me to do what I do. Literally, I wouldn't be able to have this channel if it wasn't for the support of you guys. It is absolutely, it's honoring. So thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate that, and all the others, and all the members, of course. Wow, thank you very publicly. Thank you. Okay. So Avdiivka, we're going to pop into the ISW because there's a little bit more to talk about. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces continued to resist Russian advances near Avdiivka and repelled more than 17 assaults near Stepova, Severny, Antonienki, and Pervomaisky. So just to, I know most of you know where these places are, but Stepova is here in the north by Krasnohorivka that the Russians are trying to attack towards. That is a bit of a worry, although I'd be really worried about the coke plant going. And then Severny, Tonyenki, and Pervomaisky. So all of these areas, Pervomaisky possibly being the site of some gains for the Russians. Ukrainian Tavrisk group of forces spokesperson Stupin later stated that there were no active combat engagements near Avdiivka, so slightly different. 17, none. But that Ukrainian forces expect the situation to worsen in the area. Avdiivka city military and administration head Barabash stated that Russian forces are heavily shelling Ukrainian positions in Avdiivka and that infantry battles are ongoing north and south of the settlement. So I would assume that Stupin isn't quite correct in the fact that there are no active combat engagements. But I would think that the situation might well worsen and that battles are ongoing. A Ukrainian military observer stated that Russian forces are quickly constructing fortifications in the rear areas close to the areas of intended advance in the Avdiivka area so that they can more quickly commit reserves to combat. Now, talking about defenses, Andrew Perpetua's live stream was interesting the other night. He talked about last night. He talked about a number of things. First of all, that he doesn't think that there are enough defenses further back. So once you get past here, so you look at what the Russians have done, they've got defenses quite far back, especially if you come to the south. They've got 2-3 lines of defenses, whereas it's unlikely the Ukrainians have that in the Avdiivka area, maybe north of there as well. Is that an issue? Is it realistic to expect the Russians to break through? Well, what are the Russians trying to do? And he had a big old talk about what he thinks the Russian plans are, which effectively looks like the deep battle doctrine of the Soviet era that I've talked about many times before. So the deep battle doctrine is kind of a variation of what Andrew Perpetua is saying. The deep battle doctrine is that you attack kind of everywhere enough that you can find a weakness in a line. And once you find a weakness in a line, you then focus on that 1 or 2, maybe 3 weaknesses or however many. You focus on those weaknesses. And it might look like attacking everywhere and then suddenly attacking in some hot points. This is kind of like that. So what Andrew Perpetua is saying is they're just, instead of attacking everywhere at once, they are sort of doing slightly concurrent attacks, but they don't have enough. They don't really have enough force quantity to attack everywhere all at once. So they attack here. So they're attacking Vuhledar, then they're attacking in Avdiivka, they're attacking here, they're attacking there, and a whole number of places to try and probe. And when they find a weakness, they can exploit that weakness. And the hope is that, they find that weakness and they'll take the whole of Avdiivka, or they'll find that weakness and they'll take Mariinka or north of there, and it becomes like a domino effect, and one place will fall and then they'll all fall, etc. And it appears to be, at least according to what he says, what the Russians are trying to do. But they're also doing it in not a very sort of clever way. They use, but it's so difficult because the use of drones is so prevalent. And as I've said many times before, it's a real game changer. This kind of war has not been seen before because everything that everyone does can be spotted, is being watched often from multiple angles at the same time. And you move vehicles from A to B and you're going to get hit doing so. The Russians, they must know that, but they do it anyway, and they throw, and even when those vehicles get blown up, they do it again and again and again. And say Vuhledar, they do it a year ago, and then they wait a year and say, oh, do you know what we did last year? Yeah, all that time when we lost 100 vehicles trying to attack Vuhledar, and they just got hit by artillery and mines. Yeah, that was it. Do you think we should do that again? Yeah, why not? Yeah, it sounds like a good idea because it did work before, didn't it? No, it's a complete disaster. It's an utter disaster. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, let's do that. And that seems to be what they do. Is like definition of insanity, according to Einstein, doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. Well, you got Vuhledar, and then they apply that to Avdiivka, and then they apply it again to Vuhledar, and it's just like you're losing lots of stuff. But for them, the calculation is, well, we don't mind losing that stuff as long as we do get that sort of breakthrough, grind away at those territorial gains. The question will be, will that be enough? So will it eventually be worth it if they can take the coke plant, if they can get to Stepova? We shall see. What an incredible loss they're taking. Can they sustain those losses? Do they have enough you can argue that they've got enough boots on the ground to throw into there, but they won't be particularly good boots. They'll be poorly trained, poorly equipped soldiers. I think it's more of a problem. Do they have enough APCs and tanks to continue doing that? And I doubt that's the case. But as they're moving towards more of meat assault methodology, maybe they're not so worried about that, as long as they can endlessly throw humans into the problem. And that's pretty much what they did in Bakhmut. So there you go. Anyway, let me know what you think about all of that. ATP Geopolitics, greetings from Ukraine. Thank you for your work. Thank you, Ole. That's really, really kind of you to drop in, and so cool for you to drop in from Ukraine. So thank you. Here is, again, just my profile name. I wrote months ago in a comment to another channel that Avdiivka must be quite a thorn for Russia. I would add for Putler's ego, it was apparently clear that they would eventually try to conquer it. I think it is a thorn in the side. It's been historically a thorn in the side. So it's kind of like Bakhmut, but actually more history than Bakhmut. Bakhmut eventually became this thing that they fought over, the Russians fought over, and they decided we've got to take it now. Sunk cost fallacy. We've done this so much. We'll keep going, keep going, keep going. And it became this PR battle between the two sides, really. Avdiivka was already that PR battle. The airport from the 2014 conflict onwards, this has been an area with quite a lot of history. You can see the purple line here goes across the airport. This is the annexation line and is very close to where we're at in many places at the moment. And so it has much more historical purchase than, say, Bakhmut, that was nowhere near the purple line there. So yes, it's been a thorn in the side for Russia for a long time, and it also has far more strategic value, in my opinion, than Bakhmut. Bakhmut is a logistical hub, as I've said many times, is a logistical hub, but once you've kind of got close enough to Bakhmut, you rid it of its logistical usefulness. And even if you take Bakhmut, unless you move far beyond it, those roads are still under fire control of the Ukrainians. So it doesn't have intrinsic use. It has extrinsic use. The extrinsic use means it has use in other third entities, kind of in that kind of context. So it has a use because it gets you closer to Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. It has a use because it attrits Russian or Ukrainian soldiers or whatever. But intrinsically, in and of itself, it's not valuable. Avdiivka is more intrinsically valuable because of its proximity to Donetsk. It's right next to Donetsk, and it means that the value it has, although you can still argue that's extrinsic because it's in terms of how it affects Donetsk. So you can get artillery much closer to Donetsk to hit Donetsk by controlling Avdiivka. And it being so close to this major city, it is much more useful for the Russians to rid themselves of those Ukrainians in that area. So I think, yes, and that's why they want it. Anyway, moving on now, we are going to move a little bit to the south. We're going to come to Vuhledar, where there isn't actually a crazy amount of... Oh, no, sorry, there was one more paragraph from the ISW to do with Avdiivka. Ukrainian officials and Russian sources reported that Russian forces are preparing for a third series of larger assaults near Avdiivka. Barabash stated that Russian forces are concentrating manpower and equipment for a third massive assault on Avdiivka, and the Russian forces would likely focus their offensive operations in the Avdiivka coke plant in northern Avdiivka. This is what I really worry about, because I know someone called me out on this the other day saying, well, if you can fight your way into there and push the Ukrainians back, then surely the Ukrainians can do that to the Russians. But I just think once you're in there as an attacking force, it's going to be really difficult to flush them out, especially if they can consolidate this area behind it. It just becomes really, really difficult. And I think the writing's on the wall if the Russians get into the coke plant, unless there's a really significant counteroffensive by the Ukrainians. But it would have to necessitate that. So yeah, I really do worry about that going forward. But anyway, the ISW continues. Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces near Avdiivka are conducting a tactical regrouping, and similarly highlighted the Avdiivka coke plant as the objective of a potential future Russian offensive operations. Barabash stated that Russian forces will renew larger offensive operations when the ground near Avdiivka dries after several recent days of heavy rain. So it has been pretty tough in terms of the rain, not just here, but in other places, and that will affect how each side conducts themselves. Thank you very much to Pete Burkett. Close air support would change things instantly. Your thoughts? My thoughts? Yes. Goodness me, this entire war is the way it is, and you could argue there is a stalemate or they're in a stupor or whatever you want to say of either side, but they are going to find it so difficult to grind out any territorial gains because they don't have close air support. And that means that drones are inhibiting people from moving forward. Now, if you had air supremacy, I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me that if you had air supremacy, if you were Russians, you would just bomb the bejesus out of Avdiivka. You would flatten the coke plant. At the moment, they are trying to do that, but it's much slower because they have to do it from back here and release. Sorry, I'll get rid of that comment now. Thanks so much, Pete. They do it from back here under the safety of distance and release these FAB 500 bombs or bigger ones and hit targets around Avdiivka. They aren't going to be as accurate, maybe, or as effective, certainly not as effective as 2 days worth of A-10 Warthogs dropping immense numbers of bombs over this area with like sortie after sortie after sortie every day. Just two days, sorry, every hour, just like you destroy that and then you'd move in. Or you are supporting close air support. You support your maneuvers by targeting strikes on these places. You'd have helicopters in the air, you'd have fixed wing aircraft doing their thing. It would just be a completely different war. And that is a NATO doctrine. You would have down here these trench lines being absolutely obliterated, tree lines being taken out. You'd have Verbove, Novoprokopivka be completely hammered by air support or by sorties from the air, and which is the kind of Russian doctrine, which is you use artillery not for support but to facilitate maneuvers. They don't support maneuvers. So the Ukrainians, like, you're hitting them just a little bit before your maneuvers, and right, stop that now. Okay, we'll go in and maybe use some precision artillery to hit a few things, but it's kind of supporting what you do as you're doing it a little bit more, rather than the Russian doctrine, as we saw in Popasna and other places, is flattened somewhere with artillery. That's how you support the maneuvers, which is you don't do any maneuvers until the place is flattened, and then you walk in and put your flag in. That's a Russian way of doing things. Well, NATO doctrine is pretty similar, except you do all that by air because it's much more efficient and you can just absolutely flatten places if you have air supremacy. But neither side has that. And so what that allows for is drones to become much more useful, mines to be much more delaying than they otherwise would be, ATGM teams, low-flying helicopters, all these kind of things mean that neither side can advance quickly at all during this war. So yeah, absolutely 100% in agreement there. Right. So moving on from Avdiivka, we will go to Vuhledar, just down here. And I don't think there is too much to report that we don't already know, but I'll say it anyway. This is basically what we knew yesterday. Ukrainian forces repelled mechanized Russian assaults near Vuhledar from the 2nd of November. Geolocated footage published on the 2nd shows Ukrainian forces striking a column of Russian armored vehicles during a Russian assault on the eastern outskirts of Mikilska. I talked about that a lot yesterday. And then yesterday, Stupin stated that Ukrainian forces destroyed dozens of Russian military vehicles and stopped a Russian attack near Vuhledar. President Zelenskyy similarly noted on the 2nd that Ukrainian forces repelled Russian attacks in the general direction of Vuhledar, and Russian forces lost dozens of military vehicles during the attacks. Now, I've heard nothing in the last 24 hours. The last I heard was what I told you, which is just to the on the very eastern outskirts of Mikilska, just around here. And then going up this tree line, the Russians lost a huge number of vehicles, or quite a number of vehicles. And it looked very similar to what we'd seen previously in Vuhledar, although it wasn't these assaults sort of on Vuhledar. They were actually moving kind of eastwards, but there are positions all throughout. I mean, the Ukrainians, as I said yesterday, control, all of this land here, and they'll be in the tree lines, Ukrainian positions, and they'll be trying to assault those. And they tried that and they didn't do too well. So Vuhledar was a bit of a spanking for the Russians. Then when we come down to Velika Novosilka, there's really not a lot to mention. There are claims to Priyutne, north of Priyutne, maybe some more gains for the Russians there, as they claim, but no changes to the maps. We've seen this area really calm down since they pulled troops out of there, possibly to move them to Robotina, or maybe even down to Dnipro. Both Russians and Ukrainians have moved troops out of there, but I think the Russians were able to take more advantage of Ukrainians not really pushing there to take some small gains in the area, particularly Priyutne. There are, according to Andrew Perpetua, and I don't know the details of this, but there are some gains along this tree line there for the Russians around Chivone, north of Marfapil, northeastern Marfapil. So that has happened, but I don't think that's like the end of the world. And it might not even be as a result of the last 24 hours. Quite often it's just like, oh, we've got some footage of that tree line being shelled by the Ukrainians, which means the Russians are in that tree line, which means, oh, they control that tree line. And I didn't realize they previously had done. Nonetheless, it is a change in the mapping. Then we come to Robotina, and then, there's not really too much of a change there. Claims of unsuccessful attacks, no confirmed or even claimed games in the area. And this is where you're thinking that the counteroffensive really must be coming to winding down, at least to the point where there will be small probing attacks continuously to keep the Russians fixed in position. Otherwise, you're giving the Russians a chance to reconstitute and so on and so forth. So you need to keep that pressure up, but it's not full-throated attacks. It could also be that some of these units have been moved up to Avdiivka to help defend there, such as the 47th are now in Avdiivka, and so that might be a variable to consider. Then we come down to Kherson and to the Dnipro River. Hopefully everyone's all right in the live chat. Sorry that I'm not really talking to you all, but thank you for being there. You can talk amongst yourselves and hopefully answer your own questions. That would be brilliant. So we're going to come to Kherson, and it seems to all be about Krynky at the moment. So Krynky is this long town, although it does have a bit of settlement going sort of backwards from the river, but essentially it's a long settlement along this road. I've got to make sure I have my roads. Yep, I do. And that is the focus of Ukrainian activity, although possibly Korsunka as well, as we go round the river bend there towards Dnipryani, and also talk about around Kazachi Lahiri and still Pidstepny, Pischanivka, Poima, and one would assume Antonivsky Bridge as well. I know that we're going to pop into Radu Hosu, who is one in favor of Holoprastan being an area. There were some rumors sometime back of potential foothold at Holoprastan, but didn't really hear anything about that since I reported it. Anyway, let's pop into my sources for this neck of the woods. We'll start with some of the older ones, going back to last night. So near Pishtanivka, the Ukrainians have advanced closer to the town across the Konka River. That is to say that they're putting pressure on the town, although they might not necessarily be in it, but they are controlling more of the grey zone towards the settlement, the other side of this road. Okay, that's Global War Monitor. Now coming on to null reports, Kherson and Krynky. The Russian army, sources report that Krynky is still mostly Ukrainian controlled. That's interesting. A Ukrainian attack west towards Kazachi Lahiri was repelled, according to, well, I think that's according to Russian sources. So that's moving from Krynky towards Kazachi Lahiri. There was, of course, that time when the Ukrainians supposedly had a really robust foothold here to the west of Kazachi Lahiri, but we didn't really hear about that afterwards. It's kind of like suddenly frittered out, and we heard nothing more. The Ukrainians are actively hitting the approaches of Krynky with first-person view drones while trying to advance to the south. There's an awful lot of footage of Russian equipment being destroyed in the Krynky area. First-person view drones and IED dropping drones are very active around here, of course, the Ukrainians will be feeling the heat of Russian drones and artillery, as well as FAB 500 bombs as well. Now, here is Rebar talking about activity on the left bank. This is from Null Reports, quote, although the quote is from Rebar, which is a pro-Russian source. In the Kherson direction, Russian military personnel tried several times to dislodge the enemy from Krynky on the left bank of the Dnipro. They managed to achieve some success, but the Ukrainian armed forces still maintain a foothold in the center of the village. Now, fierce fighting continues in the area and drones are actively operating. In addition, the enemy maintains a bridgehead at the railway bridge to the west. So the railway bridge is the Antonivsky railway bridge further down here, where we had seen some footage previously of them active not only at this bridge, but also at the bridge over the Konka further to the southeast, where, yeah, the Ukrainians were being targeted by the Russians there. So this is Rebar saying that, yeah, that the Ukrainians are having some success. They are not being effectively repelled by the Russians. There are also the consistent criticisms the Russians have of their own leadership and their own counter battery in the area. So there is the idea that the Russians are unable to hit the Ukrainian artillery back with their counter battery fire, and indeed the artillery support for their own forces is thoroughly degraded in the Kherson area or in the Dnipro River area. Radio Hosu, who I mentioned, the Romanian analyst and general good person who helps out the Ukrainians a lot with his fundraising and activities, says, Kherson Oblast brief update next to Dnipro River. As the Ukrainian MOD will not allow any war correspondent to offer any details regarding Dnipro crossings, I can only say that today there were lots of heavy fighting on the north and south of Kherson city. So there's still a lot of operational security in the area. It is a very dynamic region. It is an active part of the front line. The Ukrainian Marines are outstandingly brave, and they will offer us soon great surprises, whether that is being in knowledge of anything that he knows that they're going to do, or it's just wishful thinking. I don't know. Other than this, I can offer you information that is already on the internet. Ukrainians have a foothold in Poima, Kozachi Lahiri, in and around Oleshki, and in the south. I really hope to see the surprise I wrote about the first time about 2 months ago, Holopristan. P.S. I was, so there we go. That's what he says of the area, which is that the Ukrainians have a foothold around Kozachi Lahiri and indeed Poima as well. And then too much later sources. So this came out today. No detailed map updates. We do give some updates on the Krynky front. According to the latest information, the Ukrainians improved its positions east towards Kozachi Lahiri. Now, if that's east towards it, that means it's coming from the Podstepny area. So rather than coming west from Krynky. So that would be interesting if he's correct in that claim. The Ukrainians are also trying to improve positions to Korsunka, but that needs verification. And Korsunka, if you remember, is this place just around the bend from Krynky. There's quite a bit of footage coming out from here. Here is some footage I won't show you, but it appears to show a whole bunch of Russians being repelled in an infantry attack somewhere, but I can't really quite work out what happens in that video. They seem to run towards this road junction, and then all kind of lie on the ground. I don't think they're actually hit with anything. And then it looks like a mortar round goes off around there. And yeah, I don't really know what it tells you. As No Report says, in Krynky occupied left bank of Kherson region, a Russian infantry group trying to close in on an entrenched Ukrainian units come under fire. A part of the group was mowed down. So that's what I think happened, is that some of those people just lying down are actually maybe lying down because they've been hit, they're dead or whatever. But you can't quite see what's going on. It kind of cuts, and yeah, I don't know. Anyway, you can go and look for that online if you want. Go to No Reports and look for that video from yesterday. And then Military Lab has just brought this out. Situation in Krynky remains tense, according to Rebar. Since October 19th, again referring to Rebar, Ukrainian formations have held a bridgehead in the village. Despite the efforts made by the Russian armed forces, they haven't cleared it. Situation remains tense. Ukrainian formations from the Katran strike group of the Ukrainian Navy, so the Marines, holding the central part of the village, having established supplies through Frolov Island from the right bank. And this is the idea that Marines are doing what the Marines have been trying to do, right? So we saw previously that Marines were active. Was it in the Vuhledar salient, this area where the Ukrainians during the early part of the counteroffensive, the Marines were doing quite a lot of the work, but they don't have heavy equipment to support them. It's not what they're about. They were pulled out of there, and possibly that's what I was saying, pulled out there, pulled either to Robotina, but actually Marines, it looks like, were pulled down to, I don't know for sure, but I think it might have been pulled down to active activities in the Krynky area and along the Dnipro River. So they are doing their thing there. Anyway, that is that for me for today. Let's have a look to see if there's anything else I can gather from the live chat. So let's have a little look. Has anyone said anything of huge importance? Of course, all of what you said is of huge importance. We have, yeah. So here from General Consensus, the US strategy is a failure. They won't commit to helping Ukraine actually defeat Russia and somehow are afraid of regime change in Russia. It's so stupid when regime change may be the only way to win. There's so much to unpick in that kind of statement. I think you can apply that to all people assisting Ukraine at the moment. There's been a lot of talk, at least historically speaking, although there is some change in rhetoric going on at the moment. The idea that we're in it for as long as it takes tells you very, very little. It's a very vague statement. And that's still what the Biden administration is saying, and other big assisters to Ukraine, rather than saying we're in this so that you win and that you win as quickly and as effectively as possible. That would be much more useful. And indeed, some of the Republican critics or at least some Republican lawmakers in the US House of Representatives this week have been saying, and I think quite rightly here, I'm usually quite critical of a lot of Republican politics as well, and I'm sorry that many of you will lean Republican, but here I think they were right, which is, let's be much more explicit as American politicians and as the government. Let's be much more explicit in what the goals of aiding Ukraine are. What are we doing this for? What are the objectives? What do we need to win? When do we need to win it by? Whatever. What do we need to achieve? And in what time frames? How much is it going to cost? And how much? What does it gain us? And what does it gain them? Etc. Etc. Like that clarity of objectives is really important for then giving Ukraine actually more meaningful stuff. So you say, right, you're going to win, right? We want you to we're in this for as long as it takes. What does that say? Not a lot. We want you to win, and by winning we mean get the Russians out of occupied territory back to 1991 borders. Okay, so right, brilliant. So what do we need to do to achieve that? Well, we need to give them this. Okay, let's give them this, and this. Is it fair for them not to be able to hit Russian targets within Russian territories when the Russians can hit the Ukrainian targets within Ukrainian territories from Russia? No, that's completely unfair. Well, in that case, we need to not restrict Ukrainian use of allied munitions, and they should be able to hit bona fide military targets within Russian borders, so on and so forth. So be really clear about your objectives, and then you can do the correct things to work towards that. There are lots of opinions about regime change and whether it would be worse or not. And it's such an unknown. It's really difficult to try and predict anything like that. What would happen if Putin, died, lost the war, there was a coup, and who would replace him? Who knows? One thing that Putin has done is he's got rid of all the people who are immediate threats around him, and that means that there is a very narrow pillar of power in Russia, and the people around Putin, very close to him, your Shoigus and Gerasimovs, as I've said many times, are not very good, and that's entirely what Putin has planned for. So he doesn't want really good, really strong mid-level leaders or high-level leaders around him doing a really good job, because then they gather momentum and they get more popular, and then they end up being a threat to Putin. So Putin gets rid of strong leaders, Prigozhin, Surovikin, Navalny, Nemtsov. He'll throw them out windows, poison them, throw them into prison, or move them to Algeria or whatever. He gets rid of them, and that means that around him there's something of a power vacuum, which is a benefit for him, but it also means it's very difficult to predict what would happen if Putin fell by the wayside, because you're thinking, well, who is there that could replace him? And if it depends also on what kind of regime change it would be, whether it's a coup, whether it's some kind of popular revolt. But if Navalny's still going to be in prison, then he's hardly able to replace Putin. So who is it that could step into that position at short notice? I just don't know. It's really difficult to say, and that's why there are so many different opinions, because it's such an unknown. And there are many people who think that whoever would replace Putin would be worse than Putin. Would be just so. When Prigozhin was alive, there were some saying, well, then he could be a threat to Putin. He could replace him, but actually he might be even more nationalistic. My view was that Prigozhin was a horrible person, but he was also much more of a realist who had a finger on the pulse. And had he been alive, if he had replaced Putin, although he wanted to absolutely destroy Ukraine, he knew really what was going on. He knew the deaths, he knew the challenges, and actually my opinion would have been was that he would have been far more likely to step back from the war, because he knew that actually it was a bit of a hiding to nothing for the Russian country. So you might get more of an ultra nationalist, but you also might get someone who might even be an ultra nationalist, but they are more of a realist. Or you might get some Russian elite stepping in who almost certainly from an economic point of view would not want the war to continue. So yeah, it's just so difficult to know. Let's actually pop into a few of the comments here, because I think this, hey JR, JR the legend, that is JR. So welcome JR, really good to have you here. Anyway, sorry, it's being a bit slow at putting these comments up. So Cheryl says, and thank you, Cheryl, such a great supporter of everything here. I've been writing to Biden to do whatever Ben Hodges said for over a year. I love that. Just like copy and paste Ben Hodges. Dear Joe, meet Ben. Ben, meet Joe. Joe, be more Ben. That'd be great. Let's get Ben Hodges in as president. Do you know what? Not a bad idea. Do whatever Ben Hodges said for over a year. He said send 500 HIMARS over a year ago, June 2022. Yeah. As I now say, just send. It's all about distance. Yes, they need artillery and mortar ammunition, of course, all of that. But my goodness, give them cruise missiles, HIMARS, ATACMS are plenty. What follows Putin will depend on how he meets his end, says Avdiivka. Yeah, kind of what I was saying, actually, mate. But the Siloviki, so these are these kind of elitist people around him, will hijack it, regardless a change of government or the power people around him. A change of government present the new leadership the opportunity to withdraw, yes, and blame Putin, yes. So I think, like, if they're rational thinkers, and of course that's a really big if, but if they are rational thinkers, and sorry, I'm going to put my head back on, it's probably not a good idea. If they are rational thinkers, the Russians, then they are more likely to withdraw, because there is no sane reason to keep in there. Like I've said to you guys before, the reason kind of Putin's still there and plugging away at this is because he's existentially linked to the outcome of this war. If Russia loses this war, Putin is either dead, coup, locked away. Richest man in the world wants to surely enjoy that richness. However, I don't think he will ever be able to, because I don't think, as I said many times, I don't think dictators ever get to enjoy the fruit of their spoil, their spoils, because dictators, the nature of dictatorships is they don't end very well generally. But when it comes to Putin, he is existentially linked to the outcome of this war, and so he will more than anyone want to stay in this war. And even that whole sunk cost fallacy, that even if he's chasing good money with bad, or bad money with good, or whatever it is, even if he's piling in those resources like a gambling addict, he's going to be willing to do that because he has got no other option. I don't think some people say that he could pull out and he'd still be a strong leader. I don't think that's ever going to happen. And so for Ukraine to prevail, Putin has to go in some way. And yeah, so it does then depend how he goes as to what will happen afterwards. Is there a coup? Is there a popular uprising? Those two things might have. If there's a coup, then you're likely to have a military leader in place. If it's a popular uprising, you might get someone completely different. If there's an elitist kind of bit of backstabbing going on, or economic recession that forces, that might have a very different outcome. So yeah, a really good point from Aussie Burger. Thanks, mate. Michael Barnett again says, Jonathan, Andrew Perpetua does not think the country will split. I think that this is one of the few ways to stop the war, split into East and West Russia. Oh, that's a much bigger topic than I'd have the knowledge to speak about at the moment. But I think there are issues internally within Russia that are worth keeping an eye on. We saw in Dagestan recently, and Russia didn't quite know how to deal with that. There's a lot of blaming, of course, of Ukraine and the West, but they need to make sure they are looking at their own internal struggles and the lot of people in the east of Russia to keep their own unity going there. And I think, yeah, I wonder. There's a really good, who was it? It's not Covert Cabal. It's no, not at all. It was oh, I forget what it's called. Is it Good News, Bad News, or whatever? Have done a really good series on Russia, and one of their videos, excellent video, is on the potential for Russia to break up and the pros and cons of that. I'll try and search it out. If Matt was here, I'd get him to talk to you while I went and Googled that. But one of you guys can Google it. What's it called? Good News, Bad News, and see if you can find the video, put it in the link. But one of the series, I think, of 3 of their videos on that kind of, on the whole economics and the whole war thing, was on this potential split up of Russia. Putin has consolidated his position. Yes, winning. This is Brian Ivy. Thanks, Brian. Always a great supporter. Winning for Russia has become holding on to what has been taken. Putin thinks he can and finally declare victory. I mean, it depends again what the objectives really are. There are some saying that really, when you look at the rhetoric of Russia, they still have maximalist objectives. They've still got those kind of genocidal maximalist objectives of taking the whole of Ukraine. And if that's really seriously his objective, then he's on a hiding to nothing. But if he can genuinely settle for the Donbass and Crimea, then he's got a much better chance of that victory. I mean, he's got 0 chance of taking the whole of Ukraine. But as far as the Donbass and what they've got at the moment, there's a much better chance of that, obviously. It's a much smaller goal. But the Ukrainians might have something to say about that. General consensus again says the idea that Putin's successor is Kremlin propaganda, most likely his replacement will end the war and seek better relations with the West. This is going back to that whole idea of whether the person will be a rational actor or not. You'd have to be insane to take over from Putin and continue to do this. So I'd agree with this position. I think whoever takes over from Putin would reverse this, because Russia's in far worse position now than it has been previously, and it's not going to get better until they kind of reverse what's been done here. The sanctions won't be lifted. The international pariah nature of Russia, and all those rich oligarchs that can't access their money and their frozen assets, I'm fairly sure whoever took over would go down the more rational route, I think, as implied here. And that should give, I think, say, the US administration solace, and should give them motivation to give as much as possible and not be worried about a regime change. That would be my opinion. Sorry, I didn't mean to put that one up, but thanks for saying that. So I think that this might be interesting. So Viggo, another great supporter. Thanks, mate. Lately, good old Nordic support there. Lately, Putin has been putting ultranationalists in jail. More likely, a replacement would come from either the military or internal security. A popular uprising is still far away. The problem with a popular uprising is that Russia has more internal security members than it does members of the armed forces. So you think they've got a lot of soldiers? Well, there's a lot more people keeping people on the straight and narrow as far as the Kremlin is concerned inside Russia. And so popular uprisings, as Viggo rightly points out, that's your least likely of outcomes for a change of regime. And again, general consensus says Putin has the power and control to just declare victory and wind it down if he wanted. As long as Russia holds Crimea, he's secure, and maybe even if he lost it too. Yeah, this is where I'm not so sure about that. As kind of hinted at earlier, some people think that he could pull out of Russia and still retain power. Maybe if his grip is that strong and there really is a power vacuum around him, maybe. But I just think that he would be in a lot of trouble. Anyway, there we go. That's probably enough from me, although people seem to be turning up and saying hello, which is joining the live stream now. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Thanks to all the members. Thanks to the kind people who have given their support today. So that's, who is it? Michael Barnett and Pete Burkett. Really appreciate that. Just seeing there's a last minute topic of conversation, because you know how much I hate goodbyes. The global economy, again, Michael Barnett, the global economy with two major wars must be slowing down. Russia's economy has been described as on the verge of depression. There's, of course, going to be issues. So Russia's economy is on the verge of like imploding. There's been all this talk for so long about China's economy being on the verge as well, and larger variables at play, such as their demographics and possibly the effect that will have on Western economies as well. So like I've said before, traditionally you have populations in pyramids or triangles, really, where you have not many people old people at the top, because healthcare and whatnot isn't very good. Longevity of life isn't great, in times past, and so you have a smaller set of people who aren't working, who need to be supported by people who are working below them. And in the olden days, they'd be supported by families, but now families can't be bothered to look after their folks, so they like trot them off to the old people's home, and then local councils and whatever pick up the bill to some large degree. Healthcare, as you get older, your health gets worse, and so health systems have to support that. And anyway, what's happening now is, as that turns from a triangle into more of a column, you have this larger proportion of people at the top than there were before, compared to a smaller proportion of people below. So where that was like, top part might have been like a fifth of the population supported by, 3/5 of the population and a fifth young people who can't work yet. Now you've got that, where you've got like a third of the population being supported, or 2/5 of the population being supported by 2/5 of the population and a fifth down below. And then that means that you don't have enough money, and there's not enough tax revenue coming in because not enough people are working, because there's too many people who are retired. And that's why the pressure is on to raise retirement ages. As we live longer, we need to work longer is the argument. So you need to raise retirement ages so that you have more people bringing tax revenues to support the burgeoning echelon at the top. And that's a problem that's going to be facing most countries around the world going forward, including China. And the idea of people like Peter Zeihan, although he's been saying this for an awful long time, it hasn't quite happened yet. So some people do criticize him for not being predictively accurate, but I think it probably will happen. And he's saying that it's actually happening sooner than had been previously predicted. Now, if China's on the edge of an economic precipice and Russia on the edge of an economic precipice, then that's really bad for Russia. However, if the rest of the world are looking economically precarious, then that's a problem. The good news is that the US is posting, I mean, say what you like about Biden, the administration is posting much better economic figures than were predicted. And it thankfully is looking a bit more rosy over there in terms of economics, and that therefore will have a knock-on effect to support for Ukraine. Like if the US can keep economically buoyant, then they're more likely to be able to give money to Ukraine. If they can't, then that money will be rediverted to for their own immediate needs. So it's important as to how economies around the world do, like allied economies do, in terms of how much can be afforded to support Ukraine, even though it is such a massively geopolitically important place and conflict, and we just can't afford to let Russia win. But there will be internal pressures elsewhere. Yeah. So thank you anyway, Michael. I don't know if I spoke to what you said. Yeah, so well, Perun does very good dives into. I mean, he is like economic strategy and wartime economics is his thing. So you can't count on their collapse, no. But they're all the figures at the moment. Ukraine, the latest, we're talking about this. You had Dom Nichols mentioning in the Defense in Depth part of the Ukraine, the latest podcast, a slightly separate thing they do, but he was talking about this, how there are growing indicators to suggest Russia is in a lot of trouble. You can talk about the interest rates being put up 2% to 15%. You can talk about all the artificial things they're trying to do to desperately keep the ruble afloat and keep the economy afloat. That at some point I just can't see it going any other way. No, you can't count on it, but man, I would bet quite a bit of money. No, I wouldn't, because I don't really do that, on the Russian economy being in an awful lot of trouble. Yes, so what the comeback is from Gen Consensus here is inflation in Europe is much higher, but there are claims that the Russian inflation figures are not accurate and not correct. And the things that they are doing would be the sorts of things they would do if they really wanted to get inflation under control. So putting up your interest rates to 15% is the sort of thing you want to do if you want to really calm inflation down so people aren't spending, blah, 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 blah. But the inflation isn't that high. So people are questioning, if inflation isn't that high, why are you putting the interest rates up so much? And one of the best, one option could be, well, because they're lying about the inflation rates, and actually inflation is arguably much higher, or et cetera, et cetera. There are, the problem is that the Russian figures are not accurate, and we've heard this week, and I reported this week that the Kremlin has said to Russian universities, please do not post negative research, or please do not have discussions that show Russia in bad light type thing. So we know that they have a vested interest in keeping the pretense going that all is fine, when actually, if you look under the bonnet, all kind of hell has been let loose, economically speaking. And I think that's probably a more accurate appraisal. And yes, high interest rates can be used to prop up the currency too. Yeah, all of the above. I mean, the currency is in trouble, but they've spanked over half their reserves now. It's just, you look at what they're doing in terms of losing so many of their workforce, the labor shortages. I mean, the only thing that can go in their favor is by putting themselves onto such a massive wartime footing that they can stimulate their own economy by just centrally stimulating it by building all the stuff for the war, kind of what we've seen maybe during the Second World War and whatnot. So perhaps that's the only thing going for them. But otherwise, when you're sanctioned so heavily by the rest of the world, and when you are so dependent on hydrocarbons, and you are struggling to sell hydrocarbons in the way that you were before and get the same amount of money, things are not looking good for Russia. And I don't see it going any other way. Yes. And Gen Consensus, can you stop commenting, please? Because I keep wanting to speak to what you're saying. No, don't. I'm joking, obviously. Thanks. On another note, Ukraine needs to mobilize far more younger men. Most Ukrainian soldiers are 40 and older, as Zelenskyy has been sparing the young men. Yeah. And maybe for reasons of the economy, but also just in terms of not wanting to force mobilize. And therefore, there will be sort of crypto mobilization going on with the Ukrainians to a degree. One wonders at some point whether Zelenskyy is going to have to bite the bullet and properly recruit, and then how that will affect that in the same way it affected Russia, where you suddenly got a lot of people running away from Russia because they didn't want to be mobilized into the army, looking after their own self-interests, which is kind of natural instinct, right? That's not criticism, but you might get that with Ukraine as well, where you bring in forced mobilization, and then a lot of young men decide to leave, and how that would affect the economic operation of the country. So he's going to be juggling so many different needs, and he has indeed put off mobilization for an awful long time. There is a big pool of people to draw from. So we talk about like struggling with boots on the ground, but actually Ukraine hasn't gone hard on mobilization yet. And that means that potentially they do have a vast resource to draw from. So it's, that can cut both ways. And you can argue the same for Russia, but I think, yeah, well, this is, you just wait till after March the 17th when you've had the presidential elections, and whether actually Russia then go, oh, thanks, Putin says, thanks, now I'm in charge for even longer, as we all knew it was going to happen anyway. But now we've had that sham election that has the just about kept up the pretense of it being not a sham election for my own internal electorate. And now we've had that, it's going to be full on national mobilization. And if that happens, what happens to the war then? So will there be pressure for the Ukrainians to get something significant achieved by March the 17th? I wonder. But yes. Thank you. Basically, I thank you very much to Robert Pitt. Some for the teabag fund. You know what? My throat, I've not been very well for the last couple of a week or so. And all this talking, I do need a cup of tea. This is absolutely true. Good bit of Yorkshire tea would be just what the doctor, I'm sure, would order. Thank you anyway, everybody. I'm going to run off now and see my family and enjoy the rest of the Saturday, as you should all do so as well. Take care of yourselves. Please like, subscribe, and share. I've been meaning to sort out so many live streams with people like Mark Bizq and Matt Bishop and Greybeard and people that I've been saying I need to get you as a panel, and then everyone's moved off to other ends of the world. And I'm just trying to, it's only me. And the problem is I have these great ideas, and I've got to kind of continue putting out what I do and keeping on top of all the news, as well as having to write 2 articles a week for Only Sky, and my own writing and publishing and all sorts I do elsewhere. So I'm literally editing a book on OCD, a second edition for a book on OCD, from a really prominent psychologist in America. And I've got to get that done, and like doing all this stuff, I just don't have the time in a day to do all the things I really want to do and do them as well as I would like to do them. So I'm really sorry for those who are expecting me to sort out live streams. I really want to do that, so just bear with me. It will happen. It's just there's only 24 hours in a day. Like, here's my challenge, guys. Right, by the time I do my next live stream, can someone invent a time machine or like a sleep machine? So if I can sleep for 10 minutes and get full night's sleep, I can make that evening time so much more, that night time so much more productive. I think we'd all benefit from that. We could all be going out and enjoying life, like watching the films we never got to see, or seeing the friends we never got to see at 4 a.m. Just a 10-minute sleep machine. We'd all be the better for it. So can someone do that by the next live stream? That'd be great. Thank you. Anyway, shut up, Piers. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Big love. Toodle pips.